Hello and welcome to the Winners Never Quit podcast about mental resilience, learning from hardship, all to build a winner's mindset. Hosted by myself, Jack Jarvis, and if you could like, follow or subscribe to the podcast, I would really appreciate it. Today I am joined by Oli Bell. Now Oli is a TV presenter, producer and podcaster who specialises in all things horse racing, covering major events including the Grand National, and has worked for Sky Australia, Racing UK and now ITV. Oli is also the co-founder of the Riding a Dream Academy, an organisation that is supporting talented young riders from diverse communities, underprivileged backgrounds and urban equestrian centres to get involved in British horse racing. And he joins me now. Oli, mate, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it, mate.
No worries. Thank you for asking me on. Looking forward to it.
No, it's going to be good. Right, so we start every podcast the same. How do you define winning in your life?
I think there's lots of layers to that. Funnily enough, I was actually talking to a producer at work the other day about he's relatively young. He's just starting out. He's very, very talented. His name's Tim, and we were talking about what he wants to achieve in kind of his career and things like that. And I'm convinced he will go right to the top. But we were talking about, like, as I said, what we want to do in the next 10, 20 years. And I think winning as a concept, you can look at it in quite a sort of black and white way. You can make more money, you can get more work, whatever it is. I don't know however people define it, but I think for me, I will feel like I've won in my life if I can leave a legacy that enhances the sort of next generation's life, basically. So to me, that's how winning looks, in my opinion. Like, I don't really need a fast car. I don't really need a nice house. I would rather, when I die, someone goes, he had a very positive impact on his sport, on his job, not for himself, but for the next generation. And I think that's possibly why I set up the academy. And I think of all the things I've achieved in my career, that's the thing I'm proudest of, because it has a very positive impact, not on me, but on hopefully a lot of youngsters who want to get into the sport of horse racing, and enhances their life.
I totally agree with what you just said then, mate, 'cause obviously been researching you all day, mate, and that academy looks pretty cool, but we'll get onto that later. So, let's go all the way back to the start, mate. Tell us about your childhood and sort of growing up.
Grew up in... where did I grow up? I grew up in...
Not a great start. He doesn't know where he grew up.
Well, initially, I grew up in Dorset. My parents split up when I was very young. I think I was about 3 at the time. And my father's side of the family... were into horse racing. My uncle's a racehorse trainer. My granddad, on dad's side, owned a lot of horses and had some very good horses growing up. But for quite a large period of my childhood, I didn't see that side of the family, because I lived with mum in Somerset. But I always had a real connection and interest in racing. My mum sort of tells a story that when I was very young, would go to sort of kids' parties and everyone's sort of running around face painting and whatever, eating skips and cocktail sausages, and I'd be sat in the corner sort of studying the form, and I think she thought I had Asperger's because I was like a proper Rain Man about horse racing. So racing was always something I was very passionate about, but as I say, I sort of looked at my family on my dad's side, the racing side of the family, from afar, really, because as I said, I didn't see that side of the family. Me, my brother and sister didn't see that side of the family for a few years. So actually, when I got the job in racing, a lot of people have this sort of misconception that I got the job because of my dad or my name or whatever. And I'm sure that the knowledge that I have of racing has definitely come from that. But as I say, it's a bit of a misconception that I got the job because of dad. Because actually, weirdly, I've become very close to that side of the family now, but that's almost through me having the job as opposed to the other way around. And I feel very fortunate to be in the position I'm in. But I think for a few years that did bother me a bit, because no one really knows about my childhood and sort of growing up, and they just assume that I come from this sort of big house with horses running around in the garden. But my mum sort of didn't have an awful lot growing up, and she, as a single mother, raised 3 kids, and I'm very grateful for her, to her for that. But yeah, I think that if people knew sort of my background and my childhood, they'd have probably a different idea in their head of what my childhood would have been like. But the one thing that I've always had was a love of racing, and fortunate enough to work in the sport that I love now.
You talk about, like, you know, growing up as a single mum, with a single mum. Was that tough? Were you like sort of, you know, was that unusual for the school you went to, or how did that, because you said there if people knew more about it?
I think, speaking very frankly, is that my father's side of my family had a few quid. They're from, you know, good stock in inverted commas, whatever you define that to be. But, you know, they had a few quid. So I was fortunate enough that my granny, who's was able to sort of pay for us, me, my brother and sister, to go to private school, a good school or whatever. Again, it depends how you define that. But so that was on the dad's side, but I didn't really know that side. I mean, I knew my granddad was like the guy that got me into racing properly. I remember when I was very young, sitting on a sofa watching racing with him, and, you know, I really looked up to him. But then I'd say from the age of, I don't know, say 9 to 16, we sort of drifted apart from that side of the family. And my mum didn't really have very much, right? Yeah. So you're going to this private school where there's lots of wealthy kids and wealthy parents, and they've all got nice cars and whatever, and the brand new football boots. But not that I didn't have that, because my mum did an amazing job. But where I went to school was like 4 hours away from where I lived. I went to school in Peterborough, lived in Somerset. And my mates back home, you know, my best mates back home, Simon, Phil, Ryan, you know, we definitely didn't have much where we grew up, right? So there was this like juxtaposition between like the school you're at and the people you hang around with at school, and then the people you were hanging around with and what you had at home. And I really liked that, because I think it's given me the best of both worlds, basically. You know, I understand the value of things. I understand, like, be nice to everyone in your village and, you know, rally together, because, you know, where we grew up, we didn't, like I say, we didn't have a load. So, I feel very fortunate in that sense. But again, it would be different, I think, to what people expect or think about me, because I've never really told anyone that. It's none of their business. But do you know what I mean?
No, I appreciate you opening it up, mate. Get him on the hard questions straight away.
But it's interesting, because I feel like it defined me in many ways growing up there, not because, like, we didn't have very much. That didn't define me. But the people I hung around with there, as I say, collectively, we wouldn't have had loads, but they taught me so many good things, like be kind to people, be polite. You know,
the things that really matter.
Exactly that. The important stuff, right? You can have a fancy car, you can have all this stuff, right? But fundamentally, it doesn't really mean anything, right? Be nice to your like neighbour, smile, have fun, don't take things for granted, look out for each other. Those things that, like, you know, I really. There's a mate of mine called Simon. He's my best mate from growing up, and I would credit him with teaching me a bit. To be honest, like, I mean, I think I might have said this to him, but he's like my sort of adopted brother, basically. But he I don't know whether he does know this, but I'd say he was like a father figure to me. He's not like wildly older than me. He's probably 7 years older, 6 or 7 years older than me. But he taught me loads of things that, like, I suppose, like a male influence in my life, it would probably be him. But our relationship is more like big brother and little brother. Yeah. And funnily enough, when when my mum moved to Cyprus when I was, I think 16 or 17, and I was still at school, and in the school holidays, I didn't go to Cyprus. I actually lived with his mum and dad and him. So, like, he essentially,
they took you in.
They basically did, actually, like, literally adopt me as well. So, you know, like, that family had a huge impact on me, basically. No. I'm very grateful to him and Linda and Goff, his parents, for everything they did for me.
Yeah, no, I 100%, mate, agree with what you just said. Then, like, when I was on that boat and I had nothing, right, I didn't miss, like, my nice watch. You know, I got a sponsored Land Rover Discovery, mate. It was lovely, mate, that car. But I didn't miss it. You know what I mean? I miss my, like, mum, my dad, going around Sunday dinners, my grandma's. Like, I totally mean all that stuff is, like, so superficial.
Yeah.
And maybe now people put a bit too much sort of importance
100%,
on it. So you go into racing. What was your first role in racing?
I was so I wasn't very good at school. I was sort of always getting in trouble, and never like that bad trouble. I was just mischievous, basically. Annoying teachers. So I never really wanted to go to uni, and I think that at private school there's very much, like, because of their, like, They basically want 100% of people to go to university, so that their report at the end of the year, they go, oh, we've got a great record. And I was the only one in my year that didn't go to uni, and I think the school really hated me for that because it meant that they didn't have a 100% record.
Oli Bell.
Yeah,
Never darken our door again.
exactly. And now I'm on TV, they actually asked me to come back and do a talk.
Of course they did. Of course they did.
I was like, you literally did everything in your power to get me out of this school, and now you want me to come back. So yeah, I didn't want to go to uni, and I knew what I wanted to do from a very young age. Like, I knew I wanted to be in racing or in sport, really, and on camera, radio, TV, whatever, broadcasting. So I kind of got my head around the fact that if I was going to succeed, I'd have to start at the bottom, obviously, and work my way up. So I basically just applied to as many people as I could for a job, and when I was at school, and just thought, I'll take whatever opportunity. I'll start at the bottom and work hard, be diligent, turn up on time, be polite. The things that, again, like, it goes back to what you kind of get taught when you're a kid, right? Anyway, so I got a job as it was an editorial assistant was the official title. The unofficial title was T-boy.
Yeah.
At Racing UK.
In the army, we call that brew bitch.
Yeah, that was me. I make a very good cup of tea. So I got a job doing that, and I mean, I would have been on peanuts back then, but moved up from Somerset to London. Lived in a house with 6 Aussies. It was a sort of house share or whatever.
How was that? That must have been an experience.
Yeah, I was so green, and I looked really young at the time. But I remember, like, you're just excited, aren't you, to like leave home, start work, like bright lights. But you don't really think about it. Like, you just kind of do it. So I never really like took a step back and been like, this is daunting because I'm leaving home or moving out of Somerset. And because I'd been to school like away from Somerset and been to boarding school, I'd kind of become, to a certain extent, pretty independent from quite a young age. So it was just exciting, and then met some great mates who are still dear friends of mine now. And to be honest, and I've spoken about this recently with some friends, those days, like, again, you don't have as much money, or you don't get paid as much when you're at the bottom of the ladder as you do when you're climbing up the ladder. But you don't really appreciate it at the time, just how enjoyable those days are when you're like learning and you don't really have a care in the world. I look back on those days so fondly because of all those reasons I just said, that it was very, very special, and I learnt from some great people. So it was possibly not the happiest time of my professional career, but I'd certainly look back on it like incredibly fondly because I just had a really good time with great people, basically, and learnt.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Like when you're young, sort of 20, you ain't got a mortgage or anything, no bills. Your biggest outgoing is like £40 on a phone.
Exactly, yeah.
It's just amazing. You touched on it then. So who was one of your mentors that stuck out for you, and in that early sort of when you're learning your way and trying to get into broadcasting?
I wouldn't have like had a mentor in terms of how I broadcast, in terms of someone being like, this is how you present or anything, but there's definitely people who had a big impact on my life. The first one, just to go back slightly earlier than that, was my history teacher, a guy called Philip Pedley, who was at Oundle. And in that system, as I was saying about, everyone needs to get an A and go to university, like, he was the one that sort of allowed me to follow what I wanted to follow, which was horse racing. So when everyone would hand in their prep, I would hand him tips. And he really like told me he knew that I wasn't going to sit and learn about World War I for 3 hours on a Tuesday, but he knew what sort of got me excited and got my brain active and the thing. So
lined his pocket with money, mate, as well.
He was making money out of it. But I think as a teacher, you have a responsibility to bring out the best in each individual student. Like, I don't think the school system is necessarily ideal because it's quite generic. It's like, this is what you do for 100 people aged 13, but that's like, one person might not benefit from that. So you've got to be quite individual, I think, in your teaching. And he was incredible at that. So I credit him with an awful lot of like allowing me to not feel stupid for wanting to do what I wanted to do, and giving me the confidence to go out and get after it. And essentially, without him, I don't think I'd be where I am today. So he was the first one. And then when I got my job at Racing UK, as it was then, a guy called Jim Ramsey was the guy that gave me the job. Basically, he was my first boss. And he was incredible. Like he was a terrific man. I haven't seen him for many years, but he gave a lot of people like me an opportunity, and invested time into us, and became like he was a mate and a boss. And yeah, he basically gave me an opportunity, right? And I think everyone who's starting out, no matter what industry you go into, basically what everyone's after is a chance. And if you get given a chance, it's then up to you to like either take it or mess it up, right?
Yeah.
But he gave me a chance, and I hope that he watches what I do now and is understanding of the impact he's had on people like me and lots of people like me, because he's shaped a lot of our careers, and a lot of people in racing presenting would credit him with that. So yeah, he was like a mentor. But as well as that, well, I also had a lot of, I mean, there's a guy called Mert Khan who's one of my best mates. He was an assistant producer, so he was like one up the ladder. We had great fun for like 4 or 5 years. You know, my house actually, funny enough, burnt down a week before I moved to Australia. And myself, my brother, my sister had all our stuff in there. And like, we literally had nothing. And he sort of said, come and I stank of smoke and whatever. And he was like, come and stay with me. So there's things like that. Like he's a great friend. And I suppose a mentor in a way, because I think your friends are your mentors in many ways.
Yeah.
You know, you probably don't realise it at the time, but me and him just for 5 years, when I was 18 to 23 or whatever, before I went to Australia, left home, first job in London, and did loads with him, and just sort of learnt from him and his sort of values and morals and how he approaches life. I think I sort of absorbed some of that, so I'm very grateful to him. I'd say he'd probably be more of a mentor than someone who's, you know, teaching me how to take talk back or do a link to camera or whatever.
Yeah.
That's fine, but I think mentors are
That's
probably
like a practical skill, but like you said, morals and like
core
values you can't really teach someone.
And I think the friends that we all have are probably more mentors than we recognise, I think, or certainly possibly say to them. You know, Simon from Somerset, Mr. Pedley, Mert, you know, these people that are very close to me. Luke, who's my best mate, who I went to school with. You know, I'd like to think that I hang around people who've got like good values and good morals, and hopefully I've learnt from some of them and been able to teach some of them stuff as well. So they'd be my mentors, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say all the boys, if you're listening, I think you've all got good morals, but Jesus Christ, you love a drink as well, probably a little bit too much.
Yeah.
So you moved to Sky Australia.
Mm.
Did that have anything to do with your housemates, or how did that all come about?
No, it didn't actually. I think it was
Where in Australia did you move to?
Lived in Sydney, so I lived in Manly
Nice.
for a few years. Whilst I was sort of running, making tea, whatever you want to call it, editorial assistant, I played poker to quite a reasonable level.
I was hoping you'd bring this up.
Made a few quid, and I'd always wanted to be a presenter, but because when I started, I was I looked about 4 basically when I started at Racing UK, so they couldn't put me.
I mean, you don't look too old now, mate, to be honest. I was
I
very
feel-
surprised when you said you're in your 30s.
But they couldn't put me on screen basically because I looked like a child.
Child.
So yeah, so I had a few years, but they employed me as a runner, whatever, editorial assistant, with one eye on me being a presenter. They knew that the like end goal was that, and I did a showreel screen test before I got my job, so they knew that I had, I guess, ability. But it was like a long play with them, for them. So anyway, was doing quite well at poker, and I half thought about whether to do it full time, quit the job and play poker around the world. But I sort of was getting close to presenting, and that's ultimately what I've always wanted to do. And then I started presenting, so I did someone with a standard story, but someone was ill. They needed someone to go to Salisbury last minute. I was around. So my first shift was at Salisbury when I would have been, I'd say 21 or 22. I can't remember exactly, but pretty young.
And that was covering racing, yeah?
Yeah, so that was covering the race day at Salisbury. It was like a Saturday evening. Like there was a big day in the like it was I mean, I love Salisbury as a racecourse, but it was comparatively like a non-event really in terms of like what was going on that day. So it was like buried away on Saturday night. There was like the Derby in the day or something. I don't know. There was a big race in the day, and it was like get Oli to do it. And I remember doing it, coming home, watching it, and being like, I've absolutely nailed that. And then a guy called Ian Cavan, who I think was producing, was like, "You just didn't stop blinking the whole time." And I watched it back again, and like that's, you can tell when I'm nervous or a bit panicked when I'm on air because I blink loads. Probably shouldn't say that, but anyway. And
He's
that
been
was
blinking non-stop since I walked into his.
So anyway, that happened, and then the next shift I did was like 2 months later, and then it was like 3 months later. Do you know what I mean? Like I was doing like one every 2 or 3 months, because one, I was young, two, I was essentially just filling in for people, and three, there was a load of really talented, and still are really talented, racing presenters there. So I was very much at the bottom of the ladder, starting my journey, but they were giving me an opportunity. Anyway, coincidentally, Sky in Australia were launching a new international racing channel called Sky Racing World. And there was a guy who used to work with some of the guys I worked with called Andrew Lejeune, who worked for Sky, basically. So he was an expat in Australia, married an Australian woman. So when they were launching this channel, they were looking for a young international racing presenter to be like the face of the channel. And genuinely, I think I was the only young racing presenter in the world at the time.
Yeah.
So I didn't have much competition, but they rang me up and said, "Look, we've got this opportunity. Would you be interested in it?" And I sort of ummed and ahed, and it was again quite daunting going away to Australia. I was having a great time. I was doing well playing poker. And I was getting like the odd opportunity here or there. So I was like, should I go? Like, is it going to benefit me? And I spoke to a guy called Lindsay Davidson, who's now like the sort of channel editor at Racing. He's like the guy I was saying, Jim Ramsey. He's now like the Jim Ramsey at Racing UK. But he was again a producer at the time. I think he might have been a bit higher up. But anyway, he was kind of one of the bosses. And he was like, look, the best thing you could ever do for your career is to go there, because it's essentially free training for us at Racing TV. You'll have a great time for you personally. And you'll come back as a presenter, whereas over the next it was a 2-year deal I got offered, whereas over the next 2 years here at Racing UK, you'll probably present, I don't know, I think he said something like 8 or 10 shifts presenting. Well, you'll do 10 shifts in 2 weeks. You know, I was presenting 5 nights a week. So he's like, just don't be an idiot, go. And if you don't enjoy it or whatever, if presenting's not for you, then come back and you can play poker when you come back, whatever. You can work in production, whatever it is. So he sort of helped me make the decision to go. And then when I went out there, didn't know anyone obviously, but it was a great experience, and like it was the best learning experience for me. But it was also brutal, because I mean, not brutal in terms of like anything genuinely brutal, especially what you lads have been through, but my hours were...
What, they beat you up as well?
My hours were, I think I was on air from 9 p.m. till 3 a.m, 5 nights a week. So you're basically like jet lagged, and when you were going to work, everyone was coming home, and when you were coming home, everyone was going to work. So you were kind of like ships in the night with all your friends, and it was, and you know, I think I had Monday and Tuesday off, so obviously everyone's working then. So it was like a kind of a bizarre work-life balance, and once I got my head around that and sort of just put my head down and just went, it's a shift and it's a slog, but it's a great experience, blah blah. I got a lot out of it. I don't know whether I'd, as a 35-year-old bloke, ever do that again, but when you're 22, 23, you can get away with doing stuff like that and doing the graveyard shift and blah blah blah. So yeah, I learned a lot, and mate, I was, to be honest, I know we were speaking about, it's not about money and all that. So I was getting paid well out there, and I was 22, living in Australia for 2 years. I had a nice time out there.
Yeah.
I was living on the beach in Manly, like it was class, to be fair. Played football for North Sydney, so got some friends out at the football club there, and yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, no, it sounds rubbish, mate. Do you know what I mean? 22-year-old living in Sydney on loads of dough. So you did your 2 years out there, and then you came back. What job did you come back to when you came back from Sydney?
Racing UK, who I had worked with, they sort of said there'll be a job waiting for you if you want to come back. And I was actually going to stay in Australia a bit longer. They initially said they'd extend, or they wanted to extend the contract for a couple of years. And I was going out with a girl out there called Kathy, who, you know, amazing woman, a jockey. She was very successful and doing really well. She'd just ridden her first Group 1 winner. And Aussies love their horse racing. They've got the Melbourne Cup. Yeah.
What's that like equivalent to in the UK?
Well, the Melbourne Cup, I mean, it's not a jumps race, but I'd say in terms of scale and like how big it is in Australia would be the equivalent to the Grand National in England. Like there's a public holiday for people in Victoria on Melbourne Cup Day and things like that. It's mega. So she'd just won a Group 1, so we were going to stay out there for a bit longer, and so I said to Racing UK, I think they'd done their budget and they'd planned to have me back, and I said actually I'm going to stay, and then within like they'd offered me the job, and then within like 2 weeks they took the contract away, so then I had to come home, and I said to Racing UK, look, can you find a way of giving me a job? It was all a bit of a disaster really, but David Bellin, the guy that sort of sorted out the contracts at the time, he was quite high up. He was very good in accommodating me coming back, even though I'd sort of ummed and ahed and messed them around, not intentionally, but. Yeah. And then I came back as a presenter for Racing UK. So I think that was 2000. It was 2012 because the Olympics was on when I came back. And rather than being a presenter once every 3 months, who made tea a lot and played the odd poker game, whatever you call it, I was presenting, I think, 20 days of the month. I was a fully fledged presenter. And what's interesting, actually, and this is what I'd say to like young people who are like daunted by like going away, or you know, I think it's really, really important for people to like expand their horizons, see different cultures, different parts of the world. Obviously, that's like beneficial to like your brain. But what was interesting is that when I started as a runner, the like perception of me in the industry was like young kid. Some people from outside of like the working environment was like got a job because of his dad and his uncle, whatever.
Yeah. Silver spoon.
Yeah.
Never had to work for nothing.
Exactly. And like, so then when I went away, the way the industry looked at me was different because I'd grown up, obviously.
Yeah. Gone away, taking his licks.
Yeah. Started to look a bit older. So I wasn't like...
2 years in Australia, mate, will do that to you.
No, sunburnt.
Skin like a leathery.
Yeah, exactly. So I wasn't the like young kid anymore. I was like given the respect as a presenter that I guess you probably need when you're a presenter. You need to have like a certain amount of authority, not just be like, who's this kid? And I think I went from being like, who's this kid, to being like, oh, Ollie's a presenter. Do you know what I mean? And I think that kind of helped me get established, but still learning, you know, as we go along. So it was fun. And then Channel 4, who were covering the racing at the time, they lost the contract, so it then went from Channel 4 to ITV. This is like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years after I'd come back. Yeah, it must be 3 years after I come back. And they wanted to like freshen up the talent lineup or the presenters or whatever. Didn't want to use loads of Channel 4 presenters. So again, like I was in a relatively small pool of people that kind of were in the running for it, and was fortunate enough to get the ITV job. So that was kind of 2 or 3 years after I came back. So when I look at my career and everything I've done, I feel very, very fortunate, because whenever like I needed an opportunity, but whenever like something came up, I was always in the right place at the right time. Like I feel that a great friend of mine called Tom Stanley, who's a brilliant presenter, and you know, we've been friends for many years. He's a couple of years older than me, but started presenting a couple of years later than me. Like if he was me and I was him, he would be the I'm adamant that he would be the ITV presenter, or he would have gone to Australia. Like I think that my advantage was that I didn't go to university, and I probably had like a couple of years head start on others in my position. And I'd say Tom is probably a better presenter than I am. He's very funny. Like it's just like a product.
Mate, you're selling yourself short there, Ollie. You've come up with some good one-liners.
I think I'm just like a product of luck, basically, and there is obviously like an element of talent in there, but it's mainly luck, if I'm honest. I think
you're doing a bit of a disservice.
No. Well, mate. I know obviously like I'm not terrible at my job.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I do think you're lucky, mate. You told me how much you've won playing poker, mate.
That's not luck.
I wanted to, speaking of poker, so you were playing poker, winning a load of dough, doing well, but you want to stick with presenting horse racing. What is it about horse racing that you love so much that makes it your passion?
I don't know whether it is a genuine passion of mine, horse racing, and I love it as a sport, and I will answer that question. But I think when I started out, it wasn't like horse racing was just an opportunity for me to get into TV, because I knew about horse racing, and it's quite a niche sport. So if you have a good level of understanding about horse racing, you're going to get involved somehow, basically. So it was just an opportunity for me to get into TV. I never see myself as a horse racing presenter. I see myself as a TV presenter who does horse racing, if that makes sense. Even though, like, I know more than most about horse racing. So for me, it was just about, like, I love all sport. And this Sunday, for example, I'm doing the FA Cup for ITV, which is a great opportunity, doing football. I've done snooker for them, boxing, things like that. But, like, not a lot. Like, every so often I do other sports and they need someone to fill in. So that's a very long-winded way of me saying I see myself as a TV presenter who would present anything. I think you get pigeonholed quite easily in horse racing because it's niche.
I would agree, because obviously doing my research on you, type in your name, it's horse racing, horse racing, won this much money playing poker. Like,
yeah.
You know, so that's my misconception.
Yeah,
really.
yeah. Well, no, I mean, to be honest, that's what I do every Saturday, and I'm a horse racing presenter at the moment. But to answer your question, what I love about horse racing is that I think it's got so many aspects to it. There's loads of people involved in the sport, so you get amazing human interest stories and you get real characters. Brilliant people are in horse racing. So that's the, like, human element of it. And then you've got the, like, equine element of it, which is like these incredible athletes that are, 500 kilos animals that are like the most brilliant athletes, as I say, and the drama that the races create. Like, I remember the first time I went racing with my granny and granddad, actually, was at Leicester, and they had a horse running called Home from the Hill, and it dead heated, and I would have been about 4 or 5 at the time.
Can you explain what dead heated means?
You can't split them, so it's when
so they cross the line at the same time?
Yeah, you've got 2 winners, basically. Yeah.
See, Ollie, you just needed to dumb it down there.
I remember going there and I was watching it on the rail, and I remember, like, the smell of it, the, like, noise of it, the, like, camaraderie that was there, the, like, feeling it gave myself. My granny was like a very sort of stiff, upper-lipped woman. Her dad was head of MI6 during the Second World War and stuff like that. And
can I get her on the podcast?
Yeah, well, she's dead now, unfortunately, so you might struggle. But
brilliant, made me feel this big, Ollie. Cheers, buddy.
We can ask her. Anyway, and just to see, like, what racing brought out in her and the emotions it evoked and stuff like that. Like, I remember that so well. And then that feeling that it gave me then, I still have now. Like, I've never lost that sort of childlike joy and emotion that I think fundamentally sport brings out in people. But for me, it's racing. And I've had moments throughout my career where I kind of forget I'm on air and remind myself why I love the sport and things like that. So I think it's a fabulous sport for lots of reasons, and I feel very lucky to work in it.
Is that when you said you forgot you were on air, is that when the Queen called you a lunatic?
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, I ran after a horse.
Yeah, go on, please explain, so if anyone hasn't heard or read this story.
So my uncle's a trainer, as I mentioned, and he had a horse called Big Orange, and the big race, like the biggest race of the week at Royal Ascot, is the Gold Cup, and it's on the Thursday, I think. And I was doing the jockey interviews, so once they cross the line, I have to interview the jockey after the race. And it was a really close finish. It was like one of those, like, heads up, heads down finishes, and it was my uncle's horse, Big Orange, against the Nathan O'Brien horse. I think it was Order of St George. And anyway, I can't, because where I am is like past the line, so I can't actually see the finishing line. I can only just like kind of see who's crossed the line first normally. But when it's a close finish, you don't really know, so you can only hear the commentator in your ear. And he went something like, Big Orange has stuck his nose out or something and won. So I just dropped my microphone, start running after the horse, being like, oh my God, we've won the Gold Cup, forgetting that there's about 20 horses still crossing the line. I'm sort of charging after Big Orange, who's a lot quicker than I am. Get about 15 metres down, and I go, he's miles away, I'm not going to catch him now. So I then turn around, and the camera's on me the whole time. And it was like, I think that what I was saying about the sort of emotion of the sport, I think what was
your euphoria.
And like, it wasn't scripted, that it was clearly very genuine. Like, I wasn't contrived doing it. I just forgot what I was doing, and my uncle's horse had won a big race, and it was a dramatic finish and things like that. And I think viewers really connected to that, and really enjoyed it, just because it was again, like I said, it was like that childlike enthusiasm for something. And I don't really think we see enough of that like really authentic emotion in sport as much as we used to, as a general point. But anyway, the next day, obviously it was like on the in the papers, that image, and everyone used it. You know, everyone saw those images. And then the next day, I was about to do an interview before a race, and the Queen had a runner in the race, so she was in the paddock, and get a tap on my shoulder from John Warren, who's her racing manager, and he was like, "Someone would like to meet," and I was like, "Oh God, I've got to meet the Queen now." I wasn't dreading it, but I was like, "Shit, what do I do? What do I bow? Do I curtsy? Well, I don't know. You know what I mean?"
Shake her hand.
I was going, "Shit, I don't. No one's ever told me what to do." So took my hat off, said hello, and she goes, "Oh, you're the lunatic that ran on the track yesterday." I was like, "Yeah, that's me, Your Majesty." And then my dad actually got really drunk and stayed in the car park, because we had the family had a big sort of celebration in the car park afterwards, which is quite common. Everyone sort of after the race day goes to the car parks, picnics and whatnot. Anyway, Dad got stuck in, and so the next thing I said to her was, "Oh, you'll never guess what my dad did. Stayed in the car park," and Dad came over at the same time, and he was like, "You haven't told her, have you?" I was like, "Yep." He's like, "You bastard." So it was a bit of a shambles, the whole conversation, but I think she enjoyed it, and yeah, it was quite funny. So yeah, it was a very special moment. I've got a picture actually next door. We're obviously in my living room now, but in the office, of me on the track looking back, and it's something I'll remember forever, basically.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Well, the Queen knew who you were, man. That's epic. Tell us about the Riding a Dream documentary and tell us about the Academy first.
Well, the Academy actually came from on the back of the documentary.
Tell us about the documentary
So
first.
to tell you about the Academy, I'll have to tell you about the documentary. Yeah. So basically, on the opening show, which is the show on Saturday morning that I present, like the preview of the race day, we played out a feature which ITV News did in London about this place called Ebony Horse Club in Brixton, and Mum, brother and sister live not too far from there. They live in Denmark Hill, so it's like a 5-minute drive from Ebony. Played this amazing feature out, and it's a community centre, riding community centre in the heart of Brixton. I mean, there's like 4 tower blocks around it, and there's this small patch of land that
almost doesn't look real, does it?
It's mad. Yeah. Honestly, I'm genuinely blown away by that place, because where it is, like, the horses are stabled in the archways under the train line, Brixton train station, basically. And like, it's mad to think that there's 10 horses there that the kids from the local area look after, ride. They do away days. You know, it's a huge and brilliant part of that community. And so once we played this feature out, I was like, I've got to go and check this out. Like, that looks wicked. And I'd never heard of it, and I'm sort of embarrassed about that. Like, it was 5 minutes away from where Mum lives. I'd been in horse racing most of my life, and I'd say not many of us would have known about Ebony back then. But this feature sort of drew my attention to it. And then when I was there, I went just on a day off, went to say hello to everyone, walked around it, and then they said, "Would you like to be a patron? Or could you be a patron for us?" And I was obviously like very flattered and delighted that they asked. And I'd never been asked to be a patron for anything ever before. Didn't really know what to do.
What even is a patron?
I still don't really know, to be honest. But I think it's just to help them get exposure and I suppose, use my platform and profile to draw attention to Ebony. And I thought, like, what can I do that will like have an impact, like make an impact? I could do a car boot sale and raise a few quid selling my dodgy old clothes.
I was going to say, no one would want to buy your clothes, mate.
My clothes.
Sat here in an Arsenal tracky bottoms.
A hoodie. It's basically what I wear when I'm not on air the whole time. Anyway, so and I thought, do you know what? I don't really know where the idea came to me, but I sort of thought, why don't we do something a bit left field and make a documentary about a rider from Ebony? And if I can find them a spot in a horse race, then maybe we could do something cool, you know. I think, again, there's lots of layers as to why I wanted to do that. I think racing's quite elitist. I think when you go racing, it doesn't accurately reflect the landscape of Britain in 2022. And I think that when you go to Ebony and you see these incredible kids from, a variety of different backgrounds, religions, races, etc., I think you look at that and then you look at a British racecourse in whenever it was, 2018, and I was like, this doesn't marry up to like.
Totally agree, and it's about opportunity. I see something do you follow The Athletic?
Mm.
So they put something out about, so Lewis Hamilton, he spent, I think it was like 60 grand in, what's his name? Black hair guy, Stroll. So his son,
Lance Stroll,
he was paid, they paid millions for him to have a seat in a race car.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, you're not a good racer, but, someone from Brixton is never going to get that opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And there are factors like to have a horse and to ride a horse, you need land, and you can't really do it.
Mate, I see someone selling a saddle like the other day for £1,700. I was like, surely not.
Yeah, mate, it's mad. And like ponies are expensive, right?
So,
so that narrows it down. Now, 100 years ago, most people lived in the countryside, I'd guess, and had horses somewhere or knew horses. Whereas nowadays, Britain is far more urban. Less people have horses. It's probably not quite as popular as it was to have a horse, etc. But anyway, I wanted to not change the game would make it sound like I love myself too much, but I wanted to do something that made people at least talk or think or go, hang on, why has that not happened before? Or why, do you know what I mean? So I had this idea to train someone up to ride in a race. Funny enough, the lunch I was at yesterday, the Peter O'Sullivan lunch, was, I always go there and I'm very lucky to be asked by Goodwood Racecourse on their table. And I was at that lunch. On my left was a guy called Adam Waterworth, who's essentially the boss at Goodwood. And on my right was a guy called Rod Street, who is the chief of Great British Racing, which is like a promotional tool for racing. And I'd had this idea with my mum. Well, I spoke to my mum and my brother about it over dinner like a couple of days before. And then at that lunch, I said to Rod and Adam, I said, I've got an idea. I don't really know how to go about making it happen, but I can find someone from Ebony. I basically need a spot in a charity race, and I need someone to pay me some money not me money, but pay for the documentaries that we can, so we can broadcast this. Now,
sorry, just to interrupt. What's a charity? Does charity race mean you can't bet on it?
Charity race is essentially I should know the answers better than
a friendly,
a
football friendly.
Yeah. So it's for like I don't want to say amateur jockeys. There are amateur. It's for like non-jockeys.
Yeah.
But there'd probably be, I don't know, 10.
So like in the documentary, there's like TV personalities, like Spencer Matthews is.
Vogue Williams was in it and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's you put on a race. The jockeys raise money for charity.
Yep.
Everyone claps and goes home.
Yeah.
Basically, they're not real jockeys as such, but you still have to be a very competent rider, and it's a hell of an achievement.
I wouldn't do it, mate.
Exactly.
Like,
it's terrifying.
I was watching the documentary. I don't even like going near horses, mate. Really, like.
Yeah.
I've seen like videos of like, people kicked in the head, and I'm like, they must be dead.
Yeah.
I would not do it. They're, like you said, they're huge. Anyway, sorry. You sat with the sort of the head shed of Goodwood, and you're like, right.
Yeah. So my brother's friend from school, Tom Bolwell, is a director, basically, of documentary maker, and his friend is Mattia Reniger, and so I got them on board. I said, look, how much roughly would it cost? We put a treatment together, told them the idea, and it was all very like not cobbled together because there was a bit of thought that went into like what we were going to make, but it was a bit like me having an idea on a Tuesday, and by Friday I'm like, shit, I've got to make a documentary now because we've got a spot in the race. We had funding for the documentary, and I think it sounds like a lot of money, but to make a documentary, as you can imagine, is quite an expensive process. I think we raised 100 grand for it, and that's essentially a year's filming, which is in relative terms not a lot. It's a lot of money, but it's not for a documentary.
For what you're doing, yeah.
So it's kind of low budget, kind of cobbled together. And when it started, I said to Ebony, I said, look, this is the idea, but the stipulations for the race, you have to be over 18. And it's a female-only race. So when I said to Ebony, I said, look, can you give us a rider who's over 18, female, and up for the challenge? There was only two that were essentially over 18, basically. So one of them lived in Newmarket and was already working in the racing industry, which was terrific. But that's not really a story to tell if someone's riding out every day. The other was Khadija, who was doing her A-levels, just turned 18. She was doing Ramadan. But this real force, like when we met, she was the only, like, we put all our eggs in one basket because we only had one basket to put our eggs into.
She's like, obviously, I've watched the documentary, mate. Like, she looks like a force. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's really
unreal.
confident.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's the thing as well. Like, having a camera stuck in your foot. Forget the riding side of it. Like, we were unwittingly like so reliant on her being charismatic, engaging, interesting, articulate, all these things, and we stumbled across,
A gem.
Yeah, one of the greatest people I've ever met. She's an absolute diamond. She's a great friend of mine now. But the journey that we went on, which I don't think we were able just because of funding and time for the documentary, it was only a short documentary, to really tell. But like the reality was, like, when she started, she'd broken her back. She failed her first assessment, which obviously we mentioned in the documentary. We weren't able to film that.
She broke her back. She fell off her horse.
Fractured her coccyx. Yeah, like at this, just before we started filming for the documentary. So like, there was all these things that happened. The horse was retired, and like I'd even though I've spoken about it a lot and obviously very passionate about it, I don't do it justice to like the actual carnage that we went through with like getting like, for people who like watched the documentary or watched the race and they're like, oh, well done, Khadija won it. Like, no one will understand the level of like ups and downs we went through with it.
See, in the documentary, I know she failed her first assessment. So, how long did you have to wait until after that assessment till the race?
After the first assessment,
yeah.
Everything was quite soon then, because once she failed the first assessment, I think it was like 2 months out from the race.
Yeah.
She obviously needed to improve her riding to race. So we then put her like into the race. She basically lived at the racing school for like an intensive. She was doing her A-level, so she didn't really have much riding experience going into that first assessment. So it's kind of unsurprising that she failed. But then she did, I think, a 3-week intensive course at the racing school, passed her second assessment, but she'd never galloped a horse until 2 days before the race. Like, the race was on Tuesday, and I think the first time she ever galloped a horse ever was on the Saturday before at Charlie's. So, like, for her to even get to the race was monumental. And then the horse that she was riding, it was a bit like Torquay playing, I don't know, West Ham, in terms of like relative terms, because there were horses that were rated sort of £20 better than hers. So on paper, it had absolutely no chance of winning. Like, forget how good Khadija was going to ride or whatever.
Yeah, because it talks about that. It was the others were rated at an 80, and it was like 66.
60, yeah. I mean, I think the highest rated horse was like 85, 66, and there's like, that is honestly like Premier League against, not Premier League, it's like an 85 rated horse would be like a championship horse, right? But it's championship and it's like non-league, basically.
So and almost like an Arsenal, sort of down here and then a Liverpool up here, mate. Not at the minute, mate.
Yeah. You can flip that round now. Yeah. But what I really loved about the whole thing was it was like myself, my brother Tom and Matthew, who I'd mentioned, and a lady called Naomi Lawson, who I'll mention when I talk about the academy in a moment. But it was, and Khadija, obviously. It was like there was such a small team involved, and we were together from, I don't know, whenever we started filming, say March until August or whatever. And then it became this like massive story. So this whole like, for the 6 months, we were just living in our own little world, like going about our business, making this documentary. Became great friends with Khadija's family, her brother Abdus, her dad Ali. Who were Ali, the father, was quite sort of skeptical at first because he had reservations about how he would portray his daughter and things like that, which I understand. He probably was quite cynical about the media, and again, I understand in some aspects why he would feel like that. So building a rapport and a relationship with him was really important. So this whole like project was very small but very close knit. And then when it transpired that she was going to be the first hijab wearing jockey and she was going to be riding in the Magnolia Cup and she was from Ebony, it became this like genuinely like global story. So we went from being like a small team to like everyone wanting a piece of it. And it was mad really, because none of us started with like that as our intention. We just wanted to promote Ebony basically and go, look, this is a great place with amazing kids and look what we can do. And then she won the race, and like, I mean, it was all a bit of a blur, but genuinely that was the greatest day I've ever had on a race course, because the pride I had for her was, I mean, I rarely cry, but I was in floods of tears afterwards. Like I will never, I don't have children, but I will never feel something like that again until I do, I don't think, because like pride like I've never even thought I could feel, basically. Just what she achieved was remarkable. And funnily enough, I don't know whether I've ever said this or I'm allowed to say it, but they're actually turning the documentary into a feature film now.
Oh,
so yeah, which is
oh
great.
mate, that's epic. And the documentary's class, mate. Like obviously I'm watching it, and like she says, she touches on it. She's like, she turns up and she's got this horse that's rated 66. Obviously, I didn't have a clue what that meant. I just knew it was bad. And then she like goes and wins it, and yeah, like you can see. And she's obviously says like she's in floods of tears and she's crying, and like it's amazing. And you know what she touched on in the documentary. She says, you know, I turned up this race course. She was like, people from my culture don't go to the horse racing.
Yeah,
and like she's right. Like when I've been to Ascot, Goodwood, Newbury, it's, you know, you don't see anyone in a hijab, do you?
Yeah.
You know, you're mainly white. And I interviewed Commonwealth gold sprinter OJ Edeburan.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, having those positive role models is really important to him.
Definitely.
And it's good to see her, you know, still, you know, doing that. And she can be like this role model for people from like her background.
Yeah, absolutely. And when she started, I was like, what do you want to get out of this? And she was like, you know, I just want some people to be inspired by what I'm doing. And then a really lovely moment actually was, my mum's a primary school teacher in Catford, which is southeast London, and we did a talk after the race at like an assembly for the kids there. And when we walked in, there was like 2 young girls, Muslim girls, both wore hijabs, like ran over and started crying because they'd like met their hero, who was Khadija, right? And for them, and I would never speak on behalf of their culture or indeed Khadija, but I would imagine that there's not loads of people that young Muslim women can look up to in sport from historically. There's obviously a few, but to have like an icon and imagery used now of like Khadija wearing a hijab, achieving an amazing thing as an 18-year-old woman, I think is genuinely really inspiring for a lot of young girls and boys actually out there. And without knowing it, we went on this journey and she became this role model to a lot of people, older and younger than her. And that's quite a big responsibility, but she's handled it like better than anyone I know could have ever handled it. Do you know what I mean? Without sort of being trained or like told what to do. And then the impact it's had within the sport of racing, and again, not to be like too like self-congratulatory, but it's had the impact that I wanted it to have in racing, because now you look at the Magnolia Cup and it's a far more diverse lineup of people riding in that race. Indeed, Ashley Wishart, who is a young black woman, won the Magnolia Cup this year, whereas prior to Khadija, I don't think it was a diverse lineup. I think now the imagery used to promote British racing, Khadija's face is on a lot of that, which when you walk down the high street and you see a billboard of racing, far more accurately reflects the world we live in than the imagery that was used before, and things like that, which make small differences but have a big impact long term. So I'm very proud of what we achieved. But documentary was good. Khadija won the race. That was good. The imagery used is different, but as I was saying at the very start, it's very important not to sort of just sit back and sort of pat yourself on the back and go, wasn't that fun? To make a real difference, I wanted to leave a legacy from this incredible story. So my brother actually came up with the idea to set up an academy, have a scholarship, the Khadija Mellor Scholarship, and help young people like Khadija get into the sport, because we obviously gave Khadija a chance and things happened in order to enable that to happen. But unless we were to do what we did and set up the academy, I don't know whether it would happen to other people like Khadija all the time. Whereas now there's something in place that hopefully allows youngsters from inner cities, from underprivileged backgrounds, as you mentioned, to get into the sport. So again, that's something I'm very proud of, and we've into the second year now. The first year's scholars finished obviously last year. I think 4 of them have been through the racing school now foundation course. Amala, was one of our first year scholars, she's kind of head girl at the racing school. She's going to be an amazing jockey. Shane works for Charlie Fellows. You know, these are amazing stories of people from the academy that are now working full time in horse racing, and that's kind of what we wanted to achieve. You know, a pathway for these youngsters who don't normally have an opportunity in racing to have an opportunity and thrive and excel, because there's some incredible children out there, really talented children who don't have the opportunity. They can't afford the opportunity, or whatever it might be. And so for us to set that up, again, it's something, the whole Riding a Dream thing, from the documentary and Khadijah's success to the academy, is something I don't think I'll do anything in my career that makes me prouder than that, basically.
Nah, mate, it's absolutely epic. And, you know, to give people that opportunity that wouldn't have it is, you know, it is special, mate. Like, and you should be mega proud of yourself. Because, you know, you didn't have to do that. That's what I always think about things like this. You didn't have to go and put yourself out. So with the academy, how does it work then? Do the kids sort of apply, and then, you know, you've only got a limited number of spaces, but sort of explain sort of the inner workings of it?
So we have 3 courses. We've got the scholarship, which I guess you'd go onto the scholarship with a relatively reasonable level of ability in terms of riding. We've got a residential week, which is a week-long course, and that you'd be like a probably less talented rider. You probably might be like entry-level riding. And then we've got a non-rider week as well, so no people who have never seen a horse in their life, basically, but might have seen racing or the industry and think that's quite a good opportunity to have a look at it.
Seen a horse and like, nah, don't want that smoke, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
That 500-kilo beast can stay over there.
So the scholarship is a week at the start of the year and a week at the end of the year, and then a weekend a month in between. So it's not, you're not there for the whole year. But yeah, you essentially apply. The application form, you'll explain how advanced your riding is, whatever. Then we go and sort of see the students or whatever.
So you are still, like, you're quite involved then?
Oh yeah. And funnily enough, we've got a week at Epsom next week, so I'll be there. So we check their riding ability to make sure they're not lying, basically. Someone who goes, yeah, I can ride, and then you put them on a horse, they don't know which way to face.
That'd be me.
Yeah, and then and then they get on the course. But I'm pleased the year 1 we didn't have that non-rider week, but I'm pleased we've added that, because I think, again, like we were saying, I don't think being on horses or around horses is that common for many people anymore. So they might go there, they might hate it, right? They might go, this was really boring and I didn't enjoy being around horses. I find it hard to think that they would, but fine. At least they've tried it, and they might love it, and then they might go, I want to work in racing, and then we have more people coming into the sport, into the industry, etc., etc. So I'm glad we did that. And then hopefully we can keep growing. But year 2, and I think year 1 we had 36 kids. I think this year we'll have about 55 coming through, and obviously next year I hope to get more. But it shows that there's and we have that's 55 like oversubscribed as well. So we have more people applying. So it shows that there's people out there that want it. Do you know what I mean?
No, mate. It's an amazing thing. And I think, like I said before, you should be really proud. Mate, that's a really good sort of conversation we just had there. And I'd like to finish the podcast with a bit of advice you would give to a young Ollie about if he was starting out in broadcasting, and now he's set up this amazing academy.
What would advice? I think just to that's a good question. That well, I think it's really important to be. I'd like to. I don't know whether I would give myself this advice, because I think I've always actioned it, but I think it's always important to remind yourself to be authentic and be who you are. That can encompass a lot of things, but I think through various stages of my career, there were times when I thought I had to be presenting in a certain way or behaving in a certain way, possibly to please others, and that's not necessarily the worst trait, because that's quite a nice, endearing thing if you want to make people happy and do things for others. But at the end of the day, like when you look back on your life and your career, I'd much rather look back on it and go, at every stage I was exactly true to myself and who I wanted to be, rather than going, I'm a bit disappointed that year I tried to present like that, or do you know what I mean? So for any youngsters getting into the industry, the biggest advice I'd ever give them is be authentic, because I think when you watch TV or whatever, I think it's so obvious when people are not being who they are.
Go on, name names. No, I'm joking.
I think it's just quite obvious to see people who are like acting or.
Yeah.
And I think, especially in this day and age, I think the more authentic you are, the better received it will be, basically.
Be authentic, be yourself, be true to yourself, mate. Good advice. Right, guys, that is the end of today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please could you follow, like, and subscribe, as it really helps grow the podcast. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy that, mate?
Yeah, terrific.
Mate,
Yeah, thank you very
awesome,
much.
mate. Thank you so much.